Aren't you afraid?
I'm terrified. But my father told me you should always face what you're afraid of.
Any last words?
Jumanji.
There is a danger in central bank digital currencies, but it is not permanent because you have to recognize it will not be a new base to a pyramid. It will simply be a new layer of the existing pyramid, which has to be based on the existing base of that pyramid, which will make it even more unstable. Hey guys, Rafa here from the End Game Investor. Today I'm going to discuss the technical reasons, the pyramidal reasons, why a reset on the elite's terms cannot happen, what they would actually have to do to effect a reset, and why it is extremely unlikely that they will be able to do it. And if they could do it, it wouldn't really be the reset that most people fear. And so we have to start with something very logical. You can't just say that something has value because it has value, and expect people to accept that. For the same reason, you can't just declare the price of a good to be X, Y, Z, and then that is just the price of it forever. Prices move because supply and demand of things always changes every second, all the time. Nothing ever stays the same. And so for the same reason, you can't just declare gas to be $3 a gallon forever without causing shortages or surpluses, depending on the economic conditions. You can't just declare that a central bank digital currency, whatever, has the value of X because that's the law. If that were true, there would be no such thing as inflation or rising prices generally, let alone hyperinflation or anything else. Because if you can just declare something to have a certain value, that means it will never ever change, but it always changes, which means if it changes, it can go to zero, which is what hyperinflation is. So what is a reset really when it is effected? Well, we have to go back into history and determine when was the last time a reset actually happened. The answer is it was 1933. And that was when FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, pilfered the entire gold supply and put it into Fort Knox. See, what FDR was doing at that point, there were many different pyramids, right? Because the gold supply was not centralized in one location. So you had different banks building different pyramidal structures that were based on the Federal Reserve's monetary policy. So member banks were following the Fed, and the Fed was poisoning the system, and that is true. And that created the boom of the 20s, which led to the bust of the 1930s. But still, the pyramids were not centralized. So you had some banks failing. The banks that built the bigger pyramids were failing faster than the banks that were more stable and more responsible, having less debt. Take a step back for a second. We can visualize the pyramid even individually. If you have the most decentralized monetary system, then you have everyone with their own gold and silver supply, either in their own bank accounts or in their houses or wherever they want to store it. And then some people decide to lend that gold out for a loan as collateral or borrow more and try to pay it back. And they have their own little pyramids. And depending on whether they are responsible or not, or whether they can pay back the debt or not, sometimes their individual pyramids collapse, which is called an individual bankruptcy. And if not, if they're responsible and they use debt well, then they can grow and they can become more successful in whatever they can consume more, etc. It's the human success in the economy. But what is the consequence when you have an entirely decentralized system and everyone builds their own debt pyramids? Okay, so someone fails. He suffers personally, he or she suffers personally, and it doesn't bring down the rest of anybody else. Now you can make the pyramids a little bigger, right? You can centralize more people's money into a bank. And then the bank can take risks which are not responsible, or risks that are responsible, depending on the bank's policies. And if that bank fails, then everyone who deposits in the bank loses money, and that causes more damage, but doesn't cause universal damage because there are different banks competing. The more you centralize the base of the pyramid, the more you can build on top of that. The bigger base of the pyramid you build, the more you can pyramid on top of that base and then make a larger monetary stack. And so when FDR decided to pilfer the entire country's gold supply and centralize it into one place and then revalue it from $21 to $35, he was creating space for himself and his central bank to print money in order to get stuff for himself and his cronies and spend more on projects that he wanted to do, like the New Deal and whatever it was. But this created an enormous pyramid. It stabilized the dollar for quite a while because he gave room for the dollar to inflate from 21 to 35, and that stayed mostly stable until 1971 when it collapsed. And so what FDR did, he didn't say, well, we're just going to scrap the dollar and I'm going to make some kind of new thing with no base, and you're going to accept it and it's going to be worth XYZ. That is impossible because that is value fiat from above and it doesn't work. It won't take. But what he can say is, remember this gold, this is money. This is already established money. I'm going to revalue it from 21 to $35 an ounce, and I'm going to issue those substitutes. And you know what? You can't redeem them anymore. Only my central bank buddies can redeem them. And so it'll be a game of pyramid between us central banks. So what FDR did, he didn't reset based on an entirely new currency. He just stole the entire base of all the pyramids, centralized it into his own little hotel in Fort Knox, and then started inflating again. And that inflation went on until 1971. The reset that many fear, they simply fear that central banks will issue things called central bank digital currencies, and we will be forced to accept them, and we will be slaves, etc. Well, there is a danger in central bank digital currencies, but it is not permanent because we have to recognize it will not be a new base to a pyramid. It will simply be a new layer of the existing pyramid, which has to be based on the existing base of that pyramid, which will make it even more unstable. So yes, central banks, governments, whatever the elite authority figures are, can force us theoretically to accept digital currencies, but only as substitutes for the existing currencies that are already in the pyramid. But then you'll have the same problem of impending hyperinflation in those substitutes of substitutes of substitutes. It wouldn't be a reset. It would just be the growing of the existing pyramid, which will eventually collapse in hyperinflation. And governments, no matter how elite or genius or whatever they are, or authoritarian they are, when there is hyperinflation, they lose their entire power base, because the center of all of their power is the money substitute that they have seigniorage to create into existence and then bid stuff away from us. Now, what can central banks and elites do to further their theft regime? What they can theoretically do is centralize the entire world's supply of gold into one place, just like FDR did when he centralized the entire country's gold supply into one place, the entire United States supply. It would have to be a global thing this time, and all central banks would have to agree that there is one central bank where they are congregating the base of the existing pyramid to make a larger global base.
It's for tourists.
And from there, they would be able to inflate more, and then we would be slaves for a considerably longer period of time until that entire base were to hyperinflate into nothing. And there are two main reasons why I don't think this is possible. First of all, you're not going to get central banks and authority figures or heads of governments, heads of state to agree on who is going to administer this central of central banks and who's going to be in charge of issuing this final global gold substitute currency and inflating it at their will and discretion. Who's going to control it? Second, FDR was smart enough to realize that gold is money and he had to take it before he was able to reset an inflation scheme. Today's central bankers and monetary quacks deny the fact that gold is still money now. They think it is actually a barbarous relic, that there is nothing to do with it. And so their hubris is so thick and frothy that they don't even realize what they have to steal in order to reestablish a base, a stronger base on which they can continue to inflate and steal. They don't understand how it works. And so if they want us to accept a central bank digital currency, they won't have the foresight to first stabilize a base of gold on which to build and pyramid this central bank digital currency, and they will simply continue on the pyramids that already exist, making them even more unstable. And so the main point I wanted to make perfectly clear is that central banks, governments, European unions, whoever these elites are, they do not have the power to simply dictate what money we use and dictate its value. Just like price controls don't work, dictating the value of a currency is just an overarching price control, which will fail. It can only be based on the existing monetary system, making the pyramid even more unstable unless they gather a new base by gathering the physical base of the pyramid, which is the global gold supply. The pyramids will stay even more unstable than they are now, which is the same thing with banning cash. Banning cash is going to accelerate price hikes because it's going to expose everything to value-added taxes and whatever other taxes, whatever other regulations and control that are now hideable when using regular physical cash. And once all those regulations and taxes apply to everything, supply is going to fall further still and prices are going to rise even faster. So yes, it's a temporary attack on freedom, but they attack their own power when they restrict the use of cash. So all of the measures that they take to steal more and more is in the end going to turn on them when the public turns against their money substitutes for once and for all and destroys the pyramid of theft that is keeping them going at our expense. What we all need to do is decentralize the pyramid on our own terms as fast as we can, responsibly, by buying gold and silver or exchanging our money substitutes for real money, and thereby creating our own stable base for our own needs in the immediate to near future. This is Rafi of the Endgame Investor. If you enjoyed this monetary lecture, consider signing up for a 2-week free trial of the Endgame Investor, where these are the type of issues that I talk about in the context of the current trading environment in precious metals markets. And if you are interested in a more philosophical bent and my take on the monetary expositions of the Bible, then sign up to be my patron on Patreon, link in the description below, where you will get one weekly video on biblical musings on monetary policy and economic topics. I'll see you guys soon. And stay tuned. This week, I will be interviewing Chris Rossini of the Ron Paul Liberty Report. That should be up sometime in the middle of this week.